Chapter 10. Jack. It's Jack's court date. The guard that has been watching him every day for the last month, Tony, bangs on his cell door with the baton. "Grimes, wake up and smell the roses. Today's the day. Your lawyer is at the courthouse waiting for you," he yells. Jack gets out of bed and changes into the suit his lawyer got him for court. Tony opens the cell door and tells Jack not to move or he will send in the riot control. Jack stands still and allows Tony to put him in full shackles. Jack is then led by Tony and 5 other security guards to the van waiting outside to take him to court. Tony puts Jack in the back of the van and gets in with him. 3 other guards get in the back with Jack and Tony, while the other 2 head up to the front and drive. Once they reach the courthouse, they lead Jack to one of the meeting rooms where his lawyer, Miss Banks, is waiting for him. Jack sits in the chair and Tony cuffs him to the table, then leaves the room. "Let me begin by saying that if we win this case, that suit is coming out of your settlement. And if we lose, you can keep it to pay off your debts to the other inmates." Jack tells her that he has no idea what she's talking about and asks her if the sanity plea will work. Mrs. Banks says, "I don't think so. There's the video from the school that shows Brian throwing the first punch, but it also shows you beating him to a bloody pulp. There's also the recording from Amelia's phone with your confession that doesn't help. Plus, there's all the witnesses that will be there." Jack asks her who the witnesses are. She tells him that talking today will be the Connors, Amelia, Miss Anderson, former principal Owens, the 2 teachers who broke up the fight, the school nurse, and an unnamed witness. Mrs. Banks is about to say something else when her phone dings with a message. "Crap! We just got one more major witness added to the list." Jack asks her who it is. She looks at him concerned and tells him it's Brian Connors. Jack's jaw just about hits the floor. "He's awake? How?" he asks her furiously. Mrs. Banks says, "Apparently a visit and talk from Amelia woke him up. And there's more. They are dating now." Jack smiles like he just won first place in the Olympics. He asks Miss Banks, "Doesn't that mean the prosecutor can't use them as witnesses because that makes it seem like they had a reason to get me sent to jail?" Mrs. Banks calls Tony into the room and heads to the judge's chambers to talk to Judge Graham. "Mrs. Banks, what are you doing here? Court begins in less than 30 minutes. Mrs. Banks says that she has something important they need to talk about and shows Judge Graham the message she got. She then asks Judge Graham if Brian and Amelia dating means that they can't be used as witnesses. Judge Graham tells her that since they started dating after the fight, they can still be called as witnesses, but they will go through all the other witnesses first and only call on them at the end if needed. Mrs. Banks looks pissed as she leaves the chambers and heads back to talk to Jack. As soon as she enters the room, Jack asks her what happened. She tells Jack what Judge Graham told her. Jack tells her that this insanity plea might be their best, would still be their best option. They argue back and forth about it for 5 minutes until Tony and the guards enter the room. Tony tells them it's time to head into the courtroom. He uncuffs Jack from the table and back onto the chain. The guards form a barrier around him and Mrs. Banks leads them to the courtroom. As they enter the courtroom, Jack notices that everybody is sitting behind the prosecutor and that nobody is sitting behind him. As Jack sits in the chair, he thinks to himself, this is going to go terribly. Judge Graham calls the court to order. Judge Graham tells the prosecutor to call her first witness. The prosecutor calls Mr. Owens to the stand. Mr. Owens is sworn in and the prosecutor starts asking her questions. "Mr. Owens, is it true that you are the former principal at Silver Oak High?" Mr. Owens tells her that she is correct. She then asked Mr. Owens why he resigned as principal. "I feel that I failed my duty of protecting all the students at my school. I allowed a violent man like Jack to join our school without checking things out first." Judge Graham addresses the court and says, "To anyone speaking here today as a witness, please only refer to the defendant as Mr. Grimes. Miss Prosecutor, you may continue questioning." The prosecutor then asks Mr. Owens if he checks background information on all students before they join the school. Mr. Owens says, "Not usually, unless they join us for their last year like Jack. I'm sorry, Mr. Grimes did." The prosecutor and Miss Banks go back and forth asking Mr. Owens questions for an hour. Throughout the rest of the first half of court, Judge Graham hears from the two teachers, the school nurse, and Miss Anderson before she calls for a recess for lunch. During lunch, witnesses are kept in the same room even if they have spoken already. Amelia sees Mr. Owens sitting by himself and goes to talk to him. "Mr. Owens," she says as she sits with him, "you said Jack only joined the school for his last year, but he, myself, and Brian have been going to school together since elementary school, so how is that possible?" Mr. Owens tells Amelia he doesn't know, but what he said was the truth.